As customary, I'd like to thank everyone for posting your questions and making this video possible. Let me quickly add, there are some questions that don't get a response, and I have my reasons. Nonetheless, I do draw the line when I'm being asked questions on the personal hygiene of guys, as well as their breath. Okay, let's begin. Do you believe Nicky Scarfo's paranoia was somewhat justified, given the previous bosses of his family, Phil Testa and Angelo Bruno, were both murdered by members of their respective administrations? What most people don't comprehend is that paranoia runs rampant in the mob. Certain clowns on YouTube call me paranoid. I was just a product of that life and the Lucchese family, where paranoia is second nature. Did Nicky Scarfo have the right to be paranoid? Absolutely. Should it have gotten to the point of him killing his friends? Absolutely not. Did you have a hangout with the guys? Well, in Staten Island, we mostly gathered at the cigar lounge. But on Long Island, we typically met in restaurants. Why did the Lucchese's Bronx faction concede power to the Brooklyn crew? Didn't the Bronx have just as many crews and outnumbered them? Well, the short answer, there's actually two reasons. The first being, there was an order sent from the official boss, Vicamuso. And the second is, Stevie Cree was smart enough to understand he could resist and be a dead underboss or go along with what was being told to him. Have you heard of anyone who was straightened out and began to abuse their status and was taken down? I've heard of it happening. Keep in mind, being inducted is not a license to abuse people. Everything you do after being inducted is a reflection on your Bogata. The series Gomorrah depicts a pension system for elderly members and the wives of imprisoned members. Did the American Cosa Nostra ever employ something like this? As for the series, I've watched season 1 and need to make some time to catch up. I've spoken about this topic before. Every family is different. Some have war chests for legal defenses, and others send money to incarcerated members. However, I personally never heard of any money being put aside for pensions. Have you read or listened to Diaco's book? Do you have any opinions on his position to cooperate and the alleged attempted hit in the hotel room? I have read the book and don't really have any opinion on what decisions he made. He chose his decision, obviously, because he felt it necessary. As for the Kimberly Hotel incident, it's always been my opinion that Diaco was extremely lucky to walk out of there with his life. When you came across recent members, how did they come across the life? Years ago, they were plucked from neighborhoods, but neighborhoods have drastically changed. So how do they find potential members nowadays? It's a given that neighborhoods changed and are not what they used to be. But there's still Italians living in Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, etc. And new members or associates, typically friends of someone or people that are introduced to other members. It's similar to prison. If you put 1,200 guys in a yard, the common denominator in people will have them automatically click up. And the same goes for the street. When you were in the life, did you hear about any families involved in the garbage business? Of course, all the families were at some point involved in that business. For the Lucchese's, it was the Avelinos on Long Island. Did Anthony Guzzo ever attempt to place his brother Vito with the Lucchese family prior to the DeLeo situation? Yes. Prior to what took place with Ralph DeLeo, and I'll add a link down below for the video on that, Anthony spoke to our captain, Big John, about pulling Vito, but as we know, that never came to fruition. Was Nicky Scarfo respected in New York? Both father and son were definitely respected. As for Nicky Jr., he had a lot of jealous backbiters who didn't like him, but they only equated to a handful of people. If members are not to call each other liars, at a sit-down, can a member say that the opposing member's statement is false or untrue? He absolutely can, but any seasoned guy is going to respond by saying, "Are you calling me a liar?" In that life, you have to weigh your words carefully. What happens to a woman who knowingly and blatantly disrespects a wise guy in public? A good example of that is a woman by the name of Robin Lynn Vituli, who I wrote a blog about. Briefly, one night at a nightclub, she smacked Pete Gotti in the face, and they found her body thrown in the garbage in a place called The Hole. You could subscribe to my blog if you want to read about it in further detail. I often hear that the Genovese family have an extra layer of secrecy and elusiveness. Do all the families operate differently? The West Side has a history of being secretive and evasive, the way a family should be. Each family operates differently as far as how much they want to be on Front Street or not. I heard Joe Watts got out recently. Do you know how old he is now? Well, according to the BOP website, he was released in January of 2022 and is presently 82 years old. Are robberies still common in the modern mafia? Not like years ago, although recently in June of 2023, 5 mob-affiliated guys were arrested after pulling off jewelry heists. If you had become a captain, how difficult would it have been for you to walk away? Whether an associate, soldier, captain, or member of the administration, if a person wants to walk away from something, they will. News reports say when Carmine Galante was killed, that at the time of the shooting, the 17-year-old son of the restaurant owner was also injured. Do you think that was an accident? And if an accident, do you think the shooters faced any repercussions or not? The shooters that afternoon entered Joe and Mary's Italian restaurant at 2:45 p.m. John Torano, who I knew and used to go out drinking with, was the kid who was shot in the back that day. Apparently, he was yelling out to warn his father, who was on the patio with their cousin, Carmine Galante. I believe he went to run into a pantry or some type of closet to go retrieve a gun, and they shot through the door and hit him. Unfortunately, John was collateral damage that day, and I highly doubt that the shooters had any problems because, let's face it, they accomplished what they were sent to do. Are families bringing in and inducting members from Italy? Does it make it harder for the feds to know the new members since they're new faces? I know the Gambinos were inducting guys from Italy. As for the FBI, if their confidential sources are not telling them about the new guys, they'll eventually learn about them just from surveilling wakes, dinners, etc. Here in the UK, we have had several openly gay, high-ranking organized crime figures. Did you have anything like that in the US? In this country, if a member, no matter what his status is found to be gay, like the former acting boss of the Di Cavalcante family, John D'Amato, they kill them. Okay, good people of YouTube, please remember to like this video as it helps with the algorithm. Also, if anyone wants to help keep this podcast going, I'm sure you know what to do. If a family does keep a war chest, is it usually the boss who manages it, or is a treasurer appointed? Naturally, a boss can control it if he wants to, or pick anyone he chooses to oversee it. For instance, Mikey DeSantis picked Michael Avellino to hold the money that was placed on the side for guys who were away in prison. When a made guy goes to prison for an extended period of time, is he replaced in the crew? Is another made guy borrowed from another crew, or is a new guy made to replace the guy in prison? When a made guy goes on trial, are his lawyer fees covered by his captain, the family, or is he on his own? Does his wife and children receive financial support from his captain or the family's administration? Firstly, a guy in prison is not replaced. He is if he dies, but they don't replace anyone who went to prison. If the guy's captain wants to beef up his crew and bring on another guy, or is given a guy, that's a whole nother thing altogether. Typically, lawyer fees fall on the member with the legal trouble. And in rare cases, maybe a captain or someone else may help the guy out with the legal costs. As for his family, if someone gives them an envelope now and then, the guy's very lucky. Most guys and their families have to fend for themselves, unfortunately. I have noticed most former mob members who cooperated usually tell of some kind of deep betrayal in that life before the decision to cooperate. Do you also find this to be the case? Let me start by saying I don't speak for other people and their reasoning why they made the decisions that they did. It has nothing to do with me at all. I could speak for myself, and I know exactly what my situation entailed: betrayal. And for the final question, John, now that you're on the other side of that life, were you oblivious to all the treachery that the mob had, or did you just turn a blind eye? To begin with, I was warned by several members, old-timers, about how the life changed and all the betrayals. And I immediately seen elements of the treachery, which I ignored because it didn't concern me. But of course, I made a mental note of who to be careful around. If a guy shows his true colors to you, you're ahead of the game. Throughout the years, I've witnessed all forms of treachery, some more unbelievable than others. And that same treachery caught up to me as well, and I became a victim of it. But I always say that betrayal and what took place, without question, was a blessing in disguise.